And over the past couple of weeks, I've had conversations in which our experiences this Pesach have been connected to some of the most difficult times in Jewish history. We are all hunkered down in our homes, separated from our families and our friends, weighted down by an ever-constricting sense of isolation and uncertainty. And on days on which we cannot employ technology, anxiety and stress only intensify, we are in many ways today at war. But what strikes me as so pertinent about this moment this year is the difference between today's crisis and that of the Shoah, which in many ways, of course, goes without saying. But more than just sheer numbers, there is something elemental that differentiates even the parallel feelings of anxiety and uncertainty and distress, and that is the cause of these feelings. 8 decades ago, a band of depraved racial supremacists sought to slaughter our entire people and others that they deemed inferior or subordinate. They brought ruin to the European continent for the purpose of culling cultures and killing people. They brought our species to the brink of evil and then went beyond, showing how malicious and malignant and pitiless human beings could be. But the war that we are waging as we speak this evening is not against human inhumanity. It is against an irrational pathogen, a mechanical organism, a virus that we can't even call evil, for it is a mindless parasite that preys without premeditation and infects without deliberation. And today, in the midst of this global crisis, we see how humanity has changed since the perpetration of the evils that we touch on this evening. All over the world, in every corner of the globe, governments have chosen to sacrifice their economies and their prosperity for the sake of saving human lives. At this moment in which we remember the darkness of which human beings are capable, we can draw strength and comfort in knowing that despite analogous feelings of powerlessness and insecurity, the cause of these feelings is the result of the lessons that the world has learned from our tragic losses, that every human life is worthy, that every human soul deserves dignity, that every death is tragic and every breath is sacred. We are cut off from our friends and our families. We are separated from each other. But at the root of this separation is a profound humanity, which stands in stark contrast with the inhumanity that forced us apart 80 years ago. This evening, we remember the horrors that our people and others suffered at the hands of horrific human beings. But we can draw strength in that remembrance as we as a species fight for each other's lives and recognize the truth of the Jewish creed that teaches the ultimate worth of every human being. And as part of our remembrance, let us now know not to take these truths for granted. And let us pray that these lessons are never forgotten. Let us remember what happened. Let us remember those who are lost and do all we can to keep the lessons of their souls alive. Before I turn to our guest speakers this evening, to whom we are so grateful for their time, we now turn to Marvin Zebrowski, a longtime member of the Young Israel of Jamaica Estates, a Holocaust survivor himself, a founder and the current treasurer of the American Society for Yad Vashem. And he will light candles in memory of the 6 million Jewish lives lost in the Shoah.
My name is Marvin Zborowski, survivor, and I'm lighting a candle in memory of the 6 million Jews that were killed during the Second World War. Thank you very much for giving me this honor.
thank you so much, Marvin, for lighting a candle for us this evening, for being on the call with us this evening, and for all that you do to preserve the memory of the lives that were so tragically taken in the Shoah. We now turn this evening to our guest speakers, to Michael Bornstein and his daughter Debbie Bornstein-Hollenstadt. And beyond being father and daughter, they are also co-authors of the remarkably accessible and highly moving memoir called Survivors Club, which weaves together testimonies and memories to tell the extraordinary story of Michael's survival. I'll leave the details of the story for them to tell, but I'll just note that liberated from Auschwitz at the age of 4, an age my daughter herself turned just 2 weeks ago, Michael's story is in many ways unique and incredibly telling. As a team, Michael and Debbie teach and speak all over the world, and it is our immense privilege to have the opportunity to hear from them this evening.
Thank you so much. Dad, are you there? See if he's unmuted himself. Hang on one sec. Bear with us. So, I see you, Dad. You have to unmute yourself. Hold on. There you go. Dad, you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. First of all, I want to thank the rabbis and your shul for inviting us here today to remember the Shoah. It's an honor to be here as part of your evening. 3 months ago, again, can everyone hear me okay?
You can, but there's some kind of noise on your end, Dad. So if you're moving something around, not on your end. Not on your end. Does anyone else have their selves unmuted? Okay, we'll keep going, Dad.
All right. Again, 3 months ago, I went back to Auschwitz for the 75th anniversary of my liberation. And I was invited there by the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Foundation. And again, one of your congregants, Dr. Bayada Shulman, was there. I didn't think I wanted to go back to Auschwitz again, but as it turned out, it was a very special experience. And I do believe that it's important to shine a light on the Holocaust and the remembrance. I didn't always feel that way. When I first emigrated to New York, I kept my sleeve down to hide my tattoo. I didn't want to talk about my past, and I even thought about removing that tattoo, but I'm glad that I kept it. I was prisoner B1148. I don't know if you see that, but I'm sure you've seen many tattoos. At 4 years old, I lived behind barbed wire in Auschwitz. I was starving, too malnourished to grow hair. I was ripped away from my mother, my mamashu, my father, and my big brother, Shlomo. After the war, I was sick, I was bullied, and assaulted. People always ask what I remember. It's hard to know what I remember and what family members and friends, relatives have told me. I do seem to remember a foul, disgusting smell. And now I know it was a smell of burning flesh. I remember voices shouting at me in German. And I remember my mamashu crying. Rats bit at my toes while I slept. And I used to sneak out of the barracks with my grandmother Dora to eat moldy potato peels from a trash can. So why go back and talk about it now? Because we cannot let the world forget the 6 million who died. I'm so grateful your shul invited our families and kids to listen tonight. I'm counting on the next generation to make sure the world never forgets what happens when bigotry and hatreds are ignored. Before I turn it over to my daughter, Debola, I want to mention that Marvin Zborowski is a special friend and relative, and we often talk about my father coming into a prison where he was, bribed the Nazis, and saved his life. Right, Marvin?
Marvin's probably muted, but he can.
Okay. But anyway, we'll turn it over to Debola.
Well, I'm going to share my screen with you now, and please bear with me because my mom, who's sitting next to my father and not right next to me, of course, is the one who's better with technology. So did I hit share? Am I sharing screen? You can see my screen now, right, guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
No,
we can see.
we see you, not the computer.
You don't see the computer?
No.
Still no?
Did you go to share screen?
Okay, hang on one second. Share screen, desktop, share. Okay, you can see my screen now, hopefully. And
Yes.
okay, super. There we go. Okay. And that the rabbi mentioned before the book that my father and I wrote, Survivors Club. So you can see there, that's my dad on the front of the book.
So on the left side, you see a map of Poland, and the bottom, the middle, you see a town called Żarki, which is a town where I was born in, and I believe Marvin Zborowski was born there as well. Just above the town, you see Częstochowa, and we'll talk about Częstochowa later on. And on the right-hand side, again, my father, Israel Bornstein, was a successful accountant. My mother, Sophie, used to love to sing and dance. And we had a tight-knit Orthodox Jewish family.
So on the right, you see a picture of my grandma Sophie on the far right. And this picture just strikes me today because I think this was taken just before the war. She's with some of her siblings and her mom here. And I just think, you know, they didn't know what was coming. They lived a happy life. They had no idea what was coming. It was the community that they lived in, as Marvin could certainly tell you, was Jewish people had pretty good lives there. And my grandma Sophie had 6 brothers and sisters, 7 siblings in all. So my dad was blessed with so many aunts and uncles when he came into the world. Żarki was actually one of the first towns invaded when the war started. And here in this image, you can see whole families were made to line up against a wall. And it was like a game. If you got tired and you lowered your hands, you would be shot. That incident happened on a day that's remembered in Żarki as Bloody Monday, September 4th, 1939. There were so many atrocities committed on that day. And I know we have a range of ages and some kids, and so we won't go into all the details, but it was a horrible, bloody invasion.
So I was born into ghetto life on May 2nd, 1940. And I always remind people that now I'm 39. I'm going to be 39 in a few weeks.
He's got a big birthday, his 80th birthday.
Yeah, I'll be 80 years old. I had a big brother, Samuel, and Żarki was an open ghetto where you can go from house to house.
So in open ghettos, you know, it was a better life than, you know, perhaps some of the closed ghettos that were enclosed encampments with barbed wire. But there were severe food shortages in Żarki, and there was something called forced contribution. So the German Wehrmacht would come door to door on a regular basis and demand that families donate or contribute certain items to the German military. On one given day, it would maybe be your jewelry. On another given day, your leather goods. And your silver goods. And so my dad's father, he did what just about every family did in Żarki. They hid whatever they could. So they created like a makeshift vault in the backyard, and they buried all kinds of important family heirlooms and money. In Marvin's house, actually right nearby, I believe that they buried some things near the foundation of the home. But that's what everybody did. And they really hoped that the war would end quickly and they would be able to get their stuff back. My dad's father, Israel Bornstein, was selected to be president of the Judenrat, which is like a Jewish committee. They were like served as like a liaison between the Nazis and the Jewish people. And it was not a coveted job. The Judenrat members were often seen as traitors by their peers. They were the ones making the hard decisions. Which of their Jewish friends and neighbors would get on a train and be deported to camps? Which one had the horrible, you know, labor jobs? And so we were nervous as we researched about what we might find out about my dad's father. And I'm very proud to say that through some interviews and the discovery of a diary and some essays left behind that we had translated, we learned that my dad's father, Israel Bornstein, was actually viewed as a hero in the town. He was bribing a particular guard they called Schmidt, and he had influence over certain guards and was making conditions more bearable, not just for my dad's family, but for the neighbors and the community members. And one of those interviews that I just mentioned was actually with Marvin Zborowski, your congregant, who was so generous with his time. I consider him like a grandfather to me now. He's been so kind and given my family so much. And one of the treasures he shared with us was a story about having been a young teen. That's Marvin there in the top left. And Dad, do you want to share the story that Marvin shared with us?
Yes, Marvin told us the story about being 14, 15 years old. He was on a work detail. One day he just felt sick. He probably had a fever, didn't go to work. The Nazis came in, put a pillow over his head, took him to jail, and the sentence for not going to work was death. And my father, according to Marvin, came in, and again, Marvin is what, 91 years old now?
Age was on the phone.
I won't tell your age, Marvin. And my father bribed the Nazis and saved his life. So we're very, very proud of that.
Marvin also shared this beautiful photo with us, a photo he told me he cherishes among his most cherished possessions. That's him in the top left. This was his secret school. Marvin's dad had his own little bribery scheme, if you will, or his own plans with his secret pot of money. Moshe Zborowski, a blessed memory, he did not like that Jewish kids couldn't go to school. And he knew how important education was. So he paid this teacher, you see there on the bottom right, to set up a secret school in the ghetto. And these were Marvin's classmates. Again, that's him on the top left. And the reason Marvin cherishes this photo so much is because he's the only survivor you see in this photo. That includes the teacher, includes the little girl sitting next to the teacher who he said he always liked, Sasha. And it includes his father, Moshe Zborowski, who was also killed. The bribery scheme, my dad's father's bribery scheme, helped to keep Żarki one of the longest running open ghettos in Poland. But eventually word came down from higher up that Żarki would become Juderein. That's German for clean of Jews. And there was nothing that could be done about it. And so ultimately my dad, his mom, Sophie, his father, Israel, his big brother, Samuel or Shlomo, and his grandmother, Dora, his dad's mother. They all were taken to the Pyeonggi labor camp. Pyeonggi was attached to a huge munitions factory, and all of the prisoners did live within barbed wire there. It was a legit camp, and it was attached to this munitions factory, so they would work long hours on the factory floor packing bullets, the very ammunition that would probably kill them one day, right? But what we learned is that within that barbed wire encampment, the Jewish prisoners there actually had a pretty decent life. People got married at Pyeonggi. They had babies at Pyeonggi. The prisoners were treated really well, relatively speaking. And that's because of a German civilian who ran the camp. They called him Hauptmann Brent. And Hauptmann Brent, we learned, felt terribly about the condition and the treatment of Jewish people. He made sure that they had access to all the food they could need, all the soap and toothpaste and all the little things we take for granted that kept them healthy. Unfortunately, in the summer of 1944, word came down from higher up that Pyeonggi would also be made uterine clean of Jews. And prisoners were all herded onto cattle cars and taken to Auschwitz.
So this is the kind of cattle car that I was herded into, and we were pushed into it, very little air to breathe. From what I understand, one of my grandparents suffocated in one of these cattle cars going to a camp.
Once you arrive, I'm sure you've all heard about the selection gate where prisoners are divided and selected, right, who lives and who dies. And I mean, we've talked to historians around the world trying to understand why my dad, a 4-year-old boy, survived even the selection gate. And for the most part, everybody just shakes their head and they call it a miracle. Nes Gadol. But I can tell you that we did learn in our research that Hauptmann Brent, the kind man who ran Pyeonggi, he sent word to Auschwitz. He said, these are the best trainloads of workers in the world, keep them alive. I mean, my dad was a 4-year-old boy. He obviously wasn't working anywhere. But we kind of wonder now whether those trainloads received maybe some extra grace, you know. At a minimum, they looked much healthier than prisoners coming in from anywhere else across Europe. At that point, they'd been well fed and well treated for quite some time. And we also are aware that there were not supposed to be children left. Most of the prisoners coming in at that point were adults, because most kids were killed in the camps that they had come from. So we assume also that the guards really weren't expecting to have kids arrive, but at Pyeonggi, the guards just sort of looked the other way, thanks to Hauptmann Brent. For whatever reason, my dad survived. He was selected to be put in a children's bunk on the women's side of Auschwitz-Birkenau. He was separated from his mom and his grandmother, who went to the women's bunk. He was separated from his dad and his big brother, who went to the men's camp. And he was taken here, and he probably would have died inside the children's bunk were it not for, we call it the chutzpah of my grandma Sophie.
Yes, this is the kind of bunk that I was in, and there were numerous kids that were in the bunk. I was one of the youngest, and they were all starving. So they took my bread rations. And my mother showed me the scar that she had coming in. She was beaten over the head, gave me some of her bread, and that's probably one of the miracles that saved my life.
My grandma Sophie would come in again and again. She'd be beaten by the guards that manned the children's bunk, but she got there whenever she could to share her bread with my dad. At some point, she got scared that he would die of starvation there, and she took another big gamble. She snuck my dad into the women's bunk one night, and she risked all of the women's lives. There are hundreds of women in every bunk, and they all could have been killed for hiding a child, but nobody said a word. They kept my dad hidden. And my grandma Sophie said my dad was such a good, quiet hider. She would keep him hidden under straw during the day when she would work. She was desperate, though, to know how her older son Samuel was doing, and how Shlomo, and how her husband Israel was doing. So one day, working near the electrified fence that separates the men and the women's side of camp, she saw a group of men, and she said, please, can you find out for me Israel and Samuel Bornstein from Żarki, Poland, how they're doing? And she found out by the end of the day that they had been murdered in the gas chambers. And my grandma Sophie said she thought about throwing herself against the fence. She thought she'd had enough, but she knew she had one son left to protect. And so she returned to the women's bunk. At some point, though, during their 6-month stay at Auschwitz, my grandma Sophie was selected again to be moved out of Auschwitz to an Austrian labor camp. So she said goodbye to my dad. What is she going to do, right? She couldn't say, I've got to stay. My son is hiding here. So she said goodbye to my dad, and she never thought she'd see him again in this lifetime. She left him in the care of all of those women and his grandmother, Dora, in the women's bunk. And we know this much on January 27th, 1945, when Soviets came in to liberate Auschwitz. My father was there. Let me, sorry, go back and play that for you.
Und Dr. Mengel suchten sich unter ihnen eine bestimmte Kategorie aus. Alle, die Sie hier als Überlebende sehen, sind Zwillinge.
Okay, are we okay on time to continue?
Sie wissen nicht, wie Sie heißen. Sie kennen Ihre Familie nicht. Nur
I know we're somewhat short on time. I won't tell you the story about calling the producer and trying to get picture, but go ahead, Deb.
Well, we'll leave something for the book, right? So my father was there when the Soviets came in, and my grandma Dora, his grandmother Dora, of course, took him back to Zarki, expecting to find nobody. But a short time after they returned, my dad's mother returned from that Austrian labor camp. She found him alive, and she never, her entire life, she never got over the shock that my dad had lived. She was stunned to see him, and she was also surprised by where my dad and his grandmother, Dora, were living. They weren't in the house they were in before the war.
Yeah, my mother tells a story about going back to our house, and some people took it over, wouldn't let my grandmother and me in, and my grandmother found a farm with a chicken coop, and that's how we lived when my mother found us, with a board over our head in a farm.
In a chicken coop. My grandma Sophie was surprised by something else too. Not only had my dad survived, but I told you she had 6 brothers and sisters, right? They all went different ways during the war. Some went into hiding, actually some of them in hiding with Marvin Zborowski on the outskirts of town in an attic. Some in bunkers, and one sister trekked across Siberia and made it, and then got paperwork from Tuni Sugihara, went all the way to Japan. Another sister was in the Majdanek death camp, Skarzushko, Buchenwald, and was led on a death march out of Buchenwald. All 7 siblings survived.
They all survived.
That's my grandma Sophie on the top right. Her brother next to her, who was in hiding. Her brother Sam was in hiding with Marvin. In the middle there is the aunt, my grandma's little sister, who was in all those camps and on the death march. You see my father there. He did not have hair. He was so malnourished. He had difficulty growing hair even after the war. And that's his first cousin, Ruth, who was hiding in a convent. That's Sam's little daughter. And she has a remarkable story too that I definitely would encourage you to, when you get a chance, read Survivors Club, just to hear that story alone. My father was sick, as you saw, and so my grandma Sophie took him to Munich, Germany, because there were camps set up. The Red Cross had DP camps, displaced persons camps, set up in Munich. So my father went there to get medical care and also to await visas to go either to Israel or to the United States. And of course, you know where that story led him. Go ahead, Dad.
Yes, so in February 1951, we traveled on a transport ship. Is it USS Stewart?
USNS General M.B. Stewart.
Yes, and took 7 days, 7 nights, and I was throwing up for 7 days and 7 nights because of seasickness. So my mother was very, very concerned about us getting into the US because U.S. immigration didn't want sick people coming in, but you can see that I did come in as a DP, as a homeless, displaced person in February '51. And then one of the proudest moments in my life was in March 1957 when I became a US citizen. So I know we all take our US citizenship for granted, but I think we're all very, very lucky to live in the United States. And then after going to Fordham University, where I got a pharmacy degree, and I became a licensed pharmacist, then went to the University of Iowa. I got a doctorate in pharmaceutical chemistry, analytical chemistry, and biochemistry. And I got another thing from the University of Iowa, and that's my wife, Judy, who's sitting next to me. And we've been married for over 50 years, 52, 53. So I think we're very lucky. Go ahead, Deb.
So this is the family now, 70 years later, 70 plus years later, 75. Actually, we have to keep updating this photo because there's more babies all the time. And you know, you could look at the picture two different ways. From one survivor, there's all of this. 6 million people were killed. Each one could have had this. Each one should have had this. And that's the awful, awful, terrible, unimaginable part. But we also look at this photo and we think from one survivor, there's all of this. Our Pesach Zoom Seder was 22. And when we can be together, we're 22 around the table. And so we feel really, really blessed. When we get together, we also have something very special with us. Dad, do you have that with you? Are you?
Yes, I do.
Perfect. So I had mentioned that makeshift vault. At the beginning of the war, the family hid as many things as they could. And you know the house was taken, but if you, after the war, but if you knew my grandma Sophie, you knew she was getting her stuff back. My grandma Sophie, before she left for Munich, Częstochowa and then Munich, she dug in her backyard. She snuck into her old backyard and until her fingernails bled, and she found her old makeshift vault. But everything inside had been stolen, except for one thing.
And that one thing is this Kiddush cup. I don't know if you can see it. It's not perfect. It has some dings in it, but it's very, very special to us. It's been used for Kiddush at our weddings, at my children's weddings, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, and it means a lot. The other thing my mother gave me was this watch, which has a gimel and a zayin on it. And the gimel and a zayin stands for Gam Ze Ya'avor, which means this too shall pass. So when we talk to children, not everyone has a perfect day. Just remember Gam Ze Ya'avor, this too shall pass, and look forward to the future.
And I guess that's kind of the perfect way to wrap things up, because I know that there have been days recently where I just think, I don't know what's coming next. And I don't think any of us has ever felt quite like this. And I remember that all the time now, Gam Ze Ya'avor. And I also will say that while I have kvetched, I'll admit, a few times in the last 6 weeks about, you know, being confined to a beautiful house in the suburbs, I think about Marvin Zborowski a lot lately. I think about my dad's father and his brother who didn't survive. I think about the camps and my dad's childhood, and it's humbling, and it keeps everything in perspective to me. And I just try to remember Gam Ze Ya'avor. So thank you so much, rabbis, and thank you to the organizers and Beata for having us here tonight to share that message.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so, so much. Michael and Debbie and Judy sitting alongside for sharing your story, the heroism, the strength of you, of your family, for weaving the history, with the memories, and for giving us perspective and, as you say, hope. And thank you so much for all that you've shared with us this evening. And I hope that we can cross paths and see you on many occasions, please God, in the days to come. And now, in commemoration of all those that you mentioned who did not survive, who were as strong and as heroic but met tragic ends, we turn now to Asher Abromowitz, who will recite the Kalmale, the memorial prayer for all 6 million who perished.
Ele moleye rachamim shochein baveroyemi ametei menuchon choino ale kanepei ashchino bemalois kedoshim uteoyerim kezoar rakiyom zehirim umeirim lenishmois 6 מיליוני אחינו בני ישראל שנהרגו שנשחטו שנשרפו שנחנקו ושנטבעו ושנקברו חיים בידי הנאצים ועוזריהם יימח שמם באושוויץ, מיידניק, טרבלינקה, מאטהאוזן ובשאר מחנות השמדה ומוסרו נפשם על קידוש השם שאנו מתפללים לעילוי נשמותיהם. לכן בעלו רחמים Yasetirem beseiser kenofov Yo Elomim Ve'yizeror Bitzeroir Achayim Es Nishemoiseh Adonai hu nachalosom Yanuchu v'shalom al mishkavom V'noyemar Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Asha, so much for that rendition of Kalmale. And I now turn with immense pleasure to Rabbi Taub, who has been recovering over the last 3 weeks from a bout of illness. And it is such a relief to know that he is now improving on the way to recovery. And we are so glad to have the opportunity to hear some closing remarks from him and some Tehillim. Oh, 1 minute.
Try this again. Rabbi Lerner,
Hey.
could I be now?
Yeah.
There. Thank you. I want to begin, as Rabbi Lerner began, by first mentioning the efforts and the labors of the committee and the sponsors of this evening. This was not a simple plan to create. I'm going to mention them again by name. They include the committee members, Michelle Lorenwitt, Norman Bobrov, Yishai Gross, Hannah Kreisler, Stu Rubenfeld, Maish Rosner, Bita Schulman, and this evening's sponsors include Yishai and Fran Gross, Isaac and Michelle Lorenwitt, Stu and Tina Rubenfeld, Ilan and Beta Schulman. We thank you all so much for your commitment to this evening. It's very hard to follow that Kelmale, the words of Rabbi Lerner, and especially the words of the Bornsteins, Michael and Judy and Debbie. I think we were all moved and touched by a personal experience. It's very bizarre to be on Zoom on Yom HaShoah, but I think it made it extra special to hear a unique and a personal story. I couldn't help but thinking during the Bornsteins' recollections, how much Michael and Judy, especially Michael, has seen in his lifetime. The majesty of growing up in Europe, the nightmare of the ghettos, the horror of the camps, the celebration of liberation, the joy of Medinat Yisrael, the relief of citizenship of the United States of America, the grief of 9/11, and now the confusion of COVID-19. And this very strange Yom HaShoah. I was looking at my notes, and I'll be very brief. I see that in the past, I always shared 3 things. And the first was that in America, which we are so fortunate to be citizens of, there are 2 dates that we remember those who paid the ultimate sacrifice. There's Memorial Day and Veterans Day. Memorial Day, we recall those that died, the real ultimate sacrifice in our wars, our victories, and even defeats. And Veterans Day are those for the survivors. 2 separate dates. In Judaism, we have 1 date, Yom HaShoah, that recognizes those that survived the Shoah, the Holocaust, and those that perished. And we have one date because those that survived, a part of them died in Europe. And those that died in Europe, a part of them still lives on with all of us in Eretz Yisrael, in Britain, in America, in Canada, in France, and all the places that Jews live and study Torah and daven and keep all the mitzvot. And the second thing I always share is a story, and I'm going to share a story tonight a little bit different, and it'll be very brief. It's a little bit of an older story. It's a story of a father. And it's a father who also had his own day of liberation, a day of celebration. And on that day, he had to bury his two sons, Nadav ve'Avihu. It's this week's Torah portion that we all read yesterday. Aaron HaKohen, Aaron the high priest, at this moment of celebration, had to bury as a father his sons. And the pasuk, the verse in the Torah tells us, Vayidom Aharon, he was silent. And Chazal wonder, what does it mean, Vayidom, he was silent? Why doesn't it say Vayishtok, or Sheket, or Vayacharish? Vayidom, says the Medrash, the term used for silence is not that he was at a loss for words. It was a Vayidom of faith. He had questions. How could you, God, make me, Aaron, the high priest, a tzaddik, a righteous man, suffer? It doesn't make sense. And even then, he was silent. I think on this Yom HaShoah especially, we all have a lot of questions. Mir can frek kashias, we could ask questions, but we have hamnish kein terutzim. We have no answers. We have no answers for the Shoah. We have no answers for the position that we are all in today, as Rabbi Lerner so beautifully and eloquently began. This is a strange Yom HaShoah. We are separated by Fios wires. I don't know why. I don't know why myself and Rabbi Lerner and so many other Rabbanim had to deal with so much suffering and death and pain and difficulty these past several weeks. I don't know why people who have to sit Shiva for those who passed due to the virus or not due to the virus can't say Kaddish. But I implore everybody to continue to not say Kaddish. There is no greater benefit to the neshamos, to the souls of those that we lost these past few weeks and the 6 million that were lost 75 years ago than staying home, putting on tefillin by ourselves, putting on our talesim, or just opening up a siddur and sitting on a couch. There's no better benefit for them than to protect those of us that are children of survivors, grandchildren of survivors, and after the next few weeks, all of us will be somewhat survivors, although very different than those who survived the Shoah. I want to end by reminding everybody that no death in the Jewish nation is in vain. Each one of the 6 million is with us on every Yizkor that we say on Yom Tov and on Yom HaKippurim. Each one of the 6 million that we loved and knew, who survived or passed, is still with us. Their neshamos shall be militzim yesharim for all of us and for all of Klal Yisrael. I was speaking to a friend of mine who has a survivor grandmother with them for a Pesach, and he said that we were all stuck at home, and by Shvoch HaMascha of the first night, we went outside expecting to see Eliyahu Hanavi, but he wasn't there. And we said, okay, you know, we're in America, we have a second night of Yom Tov. And then next night, we opened the door by Shvoch HaMascha, and he wasn't there. And all of a sudden, we found ourselves on the steps. And we were looking to the right and to the left, and our 95-year-old grandmother was on the steps, looking to the right and to the left for Eliyahu Hanavi. May he come soon and speedily. And may the era of Tchiyat HaMesim, our fundamental belief of the revocation and the resurrection of the dead and all those that we love, that great day of reunification, come soon and speedily in our day. And finally, I end with the Kapitel Tehillim that your Rabbi Emeritus, and whom we all love, myself, Rabbi Lerner, Rabbi Penner, Rabbi Butler, all love. Rabbi Hochberg used to always give me to recite at the very end of this event. And it's a kapitel of Tehillim that I think speaks to the Shoah and speaks to the current crisis. This current crisis and the Shoah both remind us that no strength of an army, no great market could protect us from what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Almighty God, wants to happen. In the blink of an eye, snap of a finger, everything could change. We turn our eyes to heaven and we ask, where does our help come from? While we support, and I'm a part of studies for vaccines, the labs and the scientists and the doctors and the nurses who are doing everything and risking their own lives for our protection, we always remember that only HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the answers, and only He can give us, the survivors of the Shoah, the koach to move forward. And with this, I begin a rendition of Shir Hamalos, Hasoanai El Ha'arim. If you have a siddur in front of you, you can say it along with me. I'm going to sit. There's no obligation to stand. Shir Lamalos, Hasoanai El Ha'arim. Me'ayin yavo Ezri, Ezri me'im Adonai, Osei shamayim v'aretz, Al yitein lamot raglecha, Al yonu Mashay merecha, Hinei lo yonum v'lo yishon shomer Yisrael, Adonai yashamerecha, Adonai yatzilicha, Al yad yeminecha. Yomam Hashemesh lo yakeka v'yareach b'layla, Adonai yishmorcha mikol ra, yishmor es nafshecha, Adonai yishmor tzeitzcha uvecha, me'ata v'yad olam.
Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Taub, for those most touching and uplifting thoughts and for that recitation of Tehillim. Also, thank you for mentioning Rabbi Hochberg. I've just seen, as I look at the participants, that Rabbi and Karen Hochberg are on this evening, and it is always a pleasure to see your name, to see your faces, and you should know everything we do is in the wake of your incredible work and leadership, and we are constantly thinking of you and thankful for all that you have built and done for us. Thank you for being on this evening, and thank you for all you continue to do for us, as there will be tomorrow morning time out with the Hochbergs at 9:30. There will be an email for that. And I want to end this evening on, as traditionally is done each year, on a note of hope, with the song of Hatikva, quite literally a song of hope. And I turn to a Rosenberg who himself was born in a DP camp, whose home of many years I now reside in. And I thank him so much for all that he does, all that he's done, and for leading us in this final note of hope.
Kolod balevav eniyema נפש יהודי הומיה, ולפתי מזרח קדימה, עין לציון סופיה. עוד לא אבדה תקוותנו, התקווה בת שנות 2000, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים. להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון וירושלים.
Thank you so much, Abe, for lifting us this evening, as I say, with that final note of hope. I want to thank again all the committee members, all the sponsors. I want to thank Michael and Debbie and Asha and Rabbi Taub and Abe and all the lay leaders who are behind the scenes working to coordinate and organize the technology to ensure the smooth run of this. I hope our time this evening serves us all as a way to engage with memory, to comfort us through this time, and to remind us to hold the line and to continue to fight for our values and for the memory of those that we've lost. The ceremony is now officially concluded. Everyone is invited, if you would like, to stay on for Mariv, for the evening prayer, which we will start in a moment or two, led by John Kramer, which will be concluded with the counting of the Omer for this evening, Sfirat HaOmer, and then we will recite, as we do every night at our 9:15 Mariv, we will recite a Yehi Ratzon, a prayer for health for those who are currently unwell, and a Mishaberach, a prayer for the welfare of doctors and nurses and researchers and public officials who are in control of decisions being made that will save lives. And we will conclude the evening that way. You are all invited to stay. You are under no pressure to stay. And I wish you all a good night, a healthy night, a night of blessing, a night of rest, a night of peace, and a Shavua Tov, a good week.